Hello. I don't. Hey, go ahead and check, please. It's one of those nights where right now there's nobody online. That, but that if I do hope people will show up. If not, we are still recording this for prosperity. Your prosperity. Whoever's watching this at a later date, you're the reason we're doing this. So, all right, we do have folks here, and Reg has just peeked in. There was. Say hi, Reg. Very good. Perfect. All right. Well, we are here. I will pray in. We do have someone popped on. I'm hoping that they, huh? That's you on? Good. Is all right. We're just checking sound. This is a sound check. Sound check 1 2. Okay. All right. Turn that off. I can definitely hear me. Awesome. All right. Let's see if we can't balance out this light a little bit. Yeah, that did help a good deal. I will have Allison be happy to hand out the handouts to folks. These are 10, 11, 12, and 13, so there should be 2 pages. So you can take some notes if you'd like. Folks at home, you can print all of these things off. Leith is online there at home, so she's live now from the house. That's awesome. I'm going to share the screen here. And this is the slide we left off of last week. So just to kind of rehash, pray us in, and then we'll begin with class. All right. Rehash, then pray. Rehash. We were talking about the accessibility mainly of our, not just our apologias, but ultimately us. We have to be accessible. And so I think that's relationship. That's the point. It's tough though, and that's where things get dirty. And so I think that's a perfect way to pray in tonight, so that we know that ultimately it's because we are going to be portals, conduits, the screen doors for God's love for somebody else. I think it's important that we kind of are able to do that. So let's go ahead and pray. God, I do thank you so much for bringing this group that is present here, but also folks that will watch this online. I do think that this apologia has been a really kind of cool exploration in really getting us to think about how you have been active in our lives, us as individuals, and then also as a faith community. We're able to hear some really cool stories. And so, God, just bless tonight, and bless each person as they continue to think on these things, pray on these things, and really prepare their hearts to be ready, like First Peter 3 asks us to share the hope, the reason for the hope that we have, the reason we live the way we do. We just pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Awesome. So, again, are there any questions at all concerning the first three aspects of this, of kind of where we were? And so, if you want to know what I mean by that, so we can just quickly fall back, and I mean quickly. So, in the beginning, 3 weeks ago, at the beginning of this exploration, we had this slide. Whoa. And this slide was kind of the structure, per se, if you want to call it that, of how God kind of put on my heart after Shannon brought it to my attention when she asked me the question, "What's your apologia?" And I said, "Well, I knew a lot of apologetics, and I had a testimony, but did I really have that kind of verbal courtroom defense that we saw out of Acts 26 last week when we read it, where Paul stood there in front of Agrippa and Festus and said, This is who I was. Go check it out. This was my way of life. Go check it out. Here, this is what Jesus did. Go check it out. And then he also had his testimony in there. This is what happened to me. This was my life beforehand. This was my life. I met Christ. This is how that happened. And this is my life now. And ultimately, it was a very convincing argument. And when they heard it, they actually got to the point where it was like, are you trying to make me a Christian right now? So quickly? As it was kind of the question. And Paul said, hey, if it quick or it take time, I hope, yes, that everyone becomes a Christian, just like me, except I have chains on. He was a prisoner. He didn't want people to be prisoner. He wanted them to feel the freedom of the gospel in all of its entirety, including freedom here on earth. And so prayer, know why we're doing this. All right. Remember, this is something that just kind of comes out of Paul. So you see it multiple times in the book of Acts, and he shares and reshares this in many of his letters. So he does this really to celebrate God. The know how, this is the lot of the work. We spent 2 weeks here. And then today we'll finish up very quickly on the where and the when. And so this is how we broke everything down. So my question is, out there or online, is there any, especially in these first 3 areas, is there anything that you'd like to ask at all? So here are the roadblocks that I already know that are out there. People are really struggling with what topic? Like, and sadly, I can't really help you. You're just going to have to dig. What really stirs your affections for Christ when you start reading these articles, when you start looking at this stuff in the Bible? What stirs that affection? What makes you say, wow, I want to know more about that? Because those are going to be the good things. And then the other major thing would be kind of what we'll talk to today a little bit. How do you know kind of when/where? When, and these are the major questions that I've had from folks. When do you do it? And so we're going to address that today because that's actually a different section. So, any questions in here about that aspect of it to this point? Got a nod? Got sleeping? And no. All right. Leith online? No. All right, good. Then we'll move on, which is absolutely fine. So because we have a very short slideshow, I don't mind flipping through this way because we're almost there. The reason I do think, though, finding something that really does kind of really get your brain thinking is because I do believe, and I really do believe, that this term apologia takes not just apologetics, and it takes not just testimony. It is something that is kind of like an alloy. Do you know what an alloy is? A mixture of metals to make a different type of metal or make something stronger. For instance, this gold ring, this is a 4-carat gold ring. It's an inside joke. And so that means the gold is mixed with another cheap metal, and it makes it harder and more stable. And because gold is very soft, if it were 24-karat gold, okay, I could easily bend it. If it were like, but this, you can run over with a car and it's going to bend. I just got kicked out of my house. So the point is I do believe that this is kind of a mixture of the two. In other words, when Paul is talking to King Agrippa and Festus, one of the most powerful aspects of that, what we would normally call testimony, was that they actually had things that they knew about, could go check out themselves. And he challenged them to do that. That's huge. Because far too many of us will share our personal stories with people. And those personal stories are good and they are effective. but they're not accessible to the other person. They can't live your life. And a lot of times we don't give them things. Sometimes it is enough. For instance, I probably have some friends who knew me in my teenage to middle 20 years who see me now and that might be enough for them to believe in a God. All right. So they knew me then, they know me now. That's a little different story. But that's not the case that I usually have, especially here in New Zealand. Most folks in New Zealand will know me as Pastor Matt. Therefore, I have to tell them not just the stuff they see, not just my personal transformation, but also how God has played just a major role in my life. And that's not going to be nearly as effective to somebody who didn't know me then. It just isn't. So I'm going to have to be able to say things in a way that gets people, plants those seeds, that gets people really thinking, huh, so that's the reason for his hope. They might not understand the transformed life because they didn't know me before, but maybe they can go look up the other evidences that I have placed in there if I'm able to meld them together properly. So we'll see tonight because I'm actually going to give her a go. So we'll see. All right. And then lastly, our last slide before I get into my apologia is this know, where, and when. One of the things that we started to mention last time, and I didn't go too much into it, but this idea down here, the last note there, this is the point. We are commissioned to make disciples. Discipleship, okay, is actually living and walking with somebody. They're actually coming in. That's what the disciples did. You're coming under the leadership and you're learning not just stuff from them, you're learning their lifestyle. And we have in the church lost our way with this idea of converting in conversions. It's very interesting how the word conversions and converts are used in the Bible compared to how we use it. And the only time we see conversions and converts in the Bible is in talking about a transformation that did take place. In other words, it was never the key. Whereas now, I actually, there are reports that I have to click off. How many conversions were taking place during your ministry? Like that's a point. Like this is a point of the Christian ministry. It was never the point. Conversion was something you celebrated. A convert was somebody you celebrated. It wasn't the point. In fact, disciple making is the point. That's what we're commissioned to do. And so there is and because of that, we have to make sure that that does lead into this where and when. Far too many times, this is just kind of copied off of that first note. An apologia is not the Christian's go-to in our conversations with others. All right? That's just not what we're supposed to do. I know far too many people that are going to start right on the evangelism trail. There's something about that that seems very, what is the best word I can say? Used car salesman. Like you're trying to sell me something. When you come right off with a pitch, right off the bat. And that's certainly not what Jesus asked us to do. This command I leave you, this is what I leave you, and that is to love one another as I have loved you. So we come at people, we come at others with love. We are to love another person. And here's our transformed lives are to be the apologia. But it's clear that we should be ready to be beacons of hope, especially in an environment of suffering, of fear, intimidation, or hopelessness. That's the context of 1 Peter 3. We've read it multiple times during this class, multiple times. And that's in the midst of suffering, in the midst of fear. Do not fear what they fear. Sanctify Christ in your heart as Lord. And then what happens is people get attracted to that. And they ask you, what is the reason for your hope? Then you're ready. You're not selling them anything. You're not going after a convert. You're with a friend, with a person that you're caring about in love, and then you're sharing this apologia, this defense. And so the where and when's pretty important. Um, and so what we have to remember, and we can sometimes lose sight of this, is that your apologia is a blessing to you. It's the work of Jesus in your life. Yes, we should be ready to share it, but it should never be turned into a tool of manipulation or a weapon of religious guilt. And so I can expand on that for sure. So, in other words, we have to remember what God's word actually says. So, I've prefaced this all in the idea of agape love, of love. When Christ says, "You love them as I loved you, this is the command I leave you, to love one another." And then we get in the other, all three synoptic gospels, you have somebody questioning Jesus, and this conversation of what's the greatest command? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. So it's love. Love is the point. This is how we're supposed to live. And what we ended up doing a lot of times is we turn, like we, because we make our apologias or conversions, or I don't know what it is, the point. We don't wait for people to actually ask us about our own hope, that we've now turned our own apologias into something that you're trying to almost like manipulate another person to think like you or to be like you. Yes, you do want that. Paul was very clear. I want that. But you don't want it out of manipulation. When Paul gave that, when we read that out of Acts 26, I mean, first of all, it was all kind of set up in this way. And if you remember the introduction, that he's like, I'm so happy that I'm able to share this with you, King Agrippa, because you know about some of these controversies of the Jews. That's actually words that he uses. In other words, it's like we've been in this relation, we've had these discussions, and now I get a chance to do this apologia for you. And so you can tell it's something that wasn't just, hey, I'm going to get you now, or I've been saving this up. This was a time where they said, okay, it's time for you. I want to hear your defense. I want to hear your defense. What's the reason for your hope? And Paul gives it. And so if we're not walking with people in a way that gets them to understand that you are other than, because the one alive you inside of you is other than, then if we're not doing that, then maybe it's more of us trying to get people to think our way than them noticing someone alive in you. And those are two different things. And so I'm hoping that we're able to start hearing people's real apologias. Because I will be honest, I am interested in my wife's apologia. We've had to write things out and have our kind of Christian whatever, lifelines and timelines read out. We've had to do things like this in the past. But I don't know if I've ever heard her apologia. I want to know Reg's apology. I certainly want to know Allison's apologia. I want to hear them. And so tonight, as you can see, boom, look at that. Nip and tucked 13 slide class. Don't you love that? I do. So with that being said, I have decided that I'm going to do my best, again, with the where am I at here? Let's get this cursor back to. I think I'm back over here. Yes, I am. All right. It makes me a little bigger. All right. With that being said, I guess I could just do this. I don't really want to, but man, look at our carpet. That is freakadocious. I think I have green screen on or something. Let me go look. Freakadocious. Yeah, I think I do have the green screen on. Let me put a brick. Yeah, I do have the green screen on. So let's take that off. Ooh, there's our green carpet. That was kind of weird. Sorry for that online. That was interesting. All right, so I'm making a small switch to my apologia. All right, questions, first of all. Let's do that. All right, so I have been doing this, so I'm not doing this to brag. This is not bragging, all right, but I am showing you that this class for me, here's our, again, all of these worksheets are available to you. This class did take like a lot. And so I took the time to do it. I did time myself. I had 2 half-hour stints of research. And I will admit that this page of my own personal testimony actually took me longer than that. So that's an hour. So I'm thinking total of 2 hours. I was intentional about trying to watch how much I took because I understand that time is an issue as well. I will also say that it was very, and I mean very much worth it, because of the fact that this, the way it's set up, it's supposed to be a sustaining thing for you. It is supposed to be something that in a time of uncertainty, doubt, suffering, fear, intimidation, that's the kind of words that are used in 1 Peter 3, that it's supposed to be something that allows you to be reminded of the goodness, the greatness of God, the redemption and the salvation that you find in his son, and a really good reminder that this ain't it. that he is ensured an eternal life for you, and that your name is written in the book of life. And so it should bring you to that place where that allows you to really be different in those situations. So in other words, you're remembering in a time of trial the goodness and greatness of God's action in your own life. And it really does allow you to walk in the midst of turmoil differently, facing terminal illness differently. That's what when some of the grand old saints that I got to walk with and have mentor me, uh, 2 of them ended up being deathly ill with terminal illnesses. And one of them, like, literally almost died 3 different times before I'd ever met him. But for some reason, God kept him on the planet. Well, I'm one of the reasons. And he took me under his wing and he showed me a lot in his life. And we did bury him too, but he was just a sweet man of God. And no matter what God threw at him, he was able to almost be like a deer on the heights. Like he walked on air. And it wasn't that he wasn't in the midst of things, because he was a very feeling man, a very real person when it came to being able to interact in situations. He just was confident and steadfast in his faith with God. So I will love Ray as long as I walk this planet, and then I will get to hug him again in glory. And he's just an awesome guy. And I've been blessed to see people like this in my life. So I have heard some of their stories, which is cool. And so you guys get to hear my story. All right. So the way I've pictured this is it'd be kind of, I don't know, somebody has asked me for some reason, have you been able to kind of handle what's been going on, not just here, but maybe even in the US and all this stuff. And you seem to be able to kind of just, continue moving forward. And so that was kind of the make believe quandary, trial or turmoil that I put on this as I tried to say, okay, in what situation would this be where someone would ask me what is the reason for my hope? All right. So the very weird time that we find ourselves in the world, in New Zealand, a lot of the things that are happening at home near a lot of my family members and all that other stuff. So there's a lot going on. And so my pretend kind of idea was somebody would approach and say, hey, how are you just kind of carrying on and being able to do this, without it seeming to affect you? And it's not that it's not affecting me. Here's my answer. And so I'm giving my apologia. Um, And this will probably be very disjointed, but it is written out and I get to practice it now. So you guys get to hear the first. So the way I would start is something like this, and then I'm just going to kind of carry on and then let you guys kind of work with it. All right. And then you can ask questions as well. I was always kind of brought up in in kind of a Christian home, and so for folks that kind of have that story, I think it's kind of interesting that if I don't remember a time where I didn't know that there at least was a God. All right. And so that is the best. It really is the best. And I don't want to take the focus off. Being brought up in a Christian home is one of the most beautiful blessings that God can give a person. It doesn't ensure good things at the end, it doesn't. But it is a good environment to be raised up as a kid. And so that was a huge blessing. It is the best, but it can also be the worst. And here's why it can be the worst, okay? Because, and I just wrote it out, so I will look at my notes here. The faith that you learn, the faith you see on display through your parents, the faith that you see in school or at church, it's not yours. It's not your faith. And because it's not your faith, because I kind of relied on other people's faith, I knew about God, but I truly never relied on God myself. So I saw Christian life in front of me and it was modeled well for me, but the faith that I learned wasn't my faith. It was somebody else's faith. And I was learning about Christ. I was learning about God through that. But I depended on those things. I never relied on God myself. And I think because of that, it never gave me, I never put it this way. It's not that they never gave me. I didn't take the opportunity to receive from God the gift of faith. I literally relied on my Christian surrounding, on a Christian upbringing, and I never had to say, God, I believe. I believe that you have done this for me, even though I've learned those lessons all my life. And so I never really kind of was able to do that. And we know, and I know, if you don't know, when people rely on their own self and their own strength to get things done, it ends up being a mess. And so for me, my mess started being an achiever. And achievers are actually, for lack of better terms, achievers are just a fraction away from abusers. In other words, in order to get approval, I would do everything I could do to succeed. Grades. I wanted to be a success. You heard some of this the other week. So grades, sports, like even life of the party. I wanted to be if we're going to go to a party, I want to be the best partier. You know, in other words, I'm going to excel at everything that I do. I if there's a line, I will go over and above that line in order to say, look, I'm here. I'm important. Because I didn't get that worth from where I needed to get it. And that, of course, was the worth that I actually have in God. I was actually seeking that from other people, seeking that approval from my parents, seeking. And it's not that they didn't do it. It's just like your parents can't give you the approval that God gives you. Your friends cannot, no matter how much of a partier, class clown, you name it, no matter how extreme you go, your friends can't give you the approval that your heart yearns for. And there's only one person that can. And so that hole gets deeper. And so what happens is underneath that achiever was a person who was really hurt and really empty, really a boy. It was an immature boy. And trying to earn worth. And in that process, that means not feeling worthy. So that's what was underneath all of that. And because of that, what happens is kind of a really pretty bad wake of destruction, broken relationships. Um, kind of you see a lot of that type of thing. And so what I finally had to do, which was good, this is was really good. Um, Marrying my wife, still bringing a lot of this baggage in to that marriage for sure. Going through what we did with our daughter didn't help matters because that, of course, achiever is going to take blame for the daughter's death and not really having a good understanding of the situation. It was another thing. And so what ends up building and what you end up getting into is the cycle of shame and guilt. And it was something that was very real in my life. But God, I can tell you, rescued in the perfect time in so many different ways. And so this person who felt very unworthy and had this cycle of shame and guilt going. And the funny thing about a cycle of shame and guilt, and you mix it with, especially, let's say, things like alcohol, what you end up doing is usually you end up acting in a way that compounds your shame and guilt again. You end up doing something stupid again that compounds your shame and guilt again. So there's only one way to go after that. You either reject all of it, reject God, and you spiral into a place of darkness where that cycle takes you into very bad places, or you cling on to the grace and the mercy of God, and you allow Him to say, "You are worthy, and I have destroyed your shame, and I have destroyed your guilt on my cross, and everything is forgiven through my blood, and you have a new life through my resurrection." And you have to believe that. And so this last weekend's sermon stuck to me like, I am the resurrection and the life. And then you hear Jesus talking to Martha, and he literally says those questions. Do you believe this? And for far too long, I never allowed God to ask me that question. Maybe I didn't want to answer him. I just kept saying no, no. But God made me this questioning, logical, scientific person. Like reason was a big deal to me. So none just not reasonings, but reason itself. What is the purpose in life? And because I kept asking those questions, it finally took me down some pretty cool roads. In other words, here's what I knew from biology. My biology degree, all the studies that I had in secular school and state-run schools was told me this, no matter what. Human beings are other than. Like in all of my studies, there is no other life form on planet Earth like a human being. In fact, that I was literally I remember writing down notes in my science classes going, I, as a scientist, it's amazing that no other life form does this. Like I'm writing notes on why I'm writing notes kind of thing. Like I'm trying to answer questions on that. Why is that? And so my biology, the science actually made me understand that human beings were other than. And what God kind of really talked to me through this, and this was one of the first times I started hearing my own worth, that I was actually made in the image and likeness of God, was that when that realization hit me, and this was got to be early 20s, it said, yeah, human beings are other than. And I kind of just heard the voice of God whisper, just a whisper at this point in my life. That means you. Like you're other than. You're more than. If human beings are other than, if they're more than, it was almost like a tap on the shoulder. You are too. And it wasn't that I didn't get that approval from other things. I had some pretty good things going on in my life. Remember, I was an achiever. Now, that underlying cycle of shame and guilt was still there. And so what the science did for me, though, with this logic, reason, scientist aspect of it, was I did dig in for a long time with the apologetics. In other words, I went in that there was a couple scientists that were apologetic speakers that I really like a lot. John Lennox, he's a professor of mathematics. Hugh Ross is an astronomer. Of course, Ravi Zacharias, William Lane Craig, Lee Strobel. I read a lot of their works and understood a lot of their ideas, and it really helped me to realize someone smarter than me believes this. Someone a lot smarter than me believes this. Even back then, it was hard for me to even say people were smarter than me, but they were a lot smarter than me. Then there was when also going. Told you to be disjointed. This book, I would say probably between the year, I think I was about 28 years old. This book, I started to question whether or not this book would be reliable. And so I actually went in to look to see if this would be is this, can I trust this book? And one of the, Bart Ehrman is a professor of theology, and he had some very bad things to say about it. He's a modern theologian, and pretty much says that Jesus isn't who he says he is and stuff like that. So I read his work, and of course I wanted this to be true, because if Jesus is real, then my cycle of guilt is over and all that other stuff. But I also was a person of logic, reason. I also have a science degree, and so what I found out is that some of his work was almost looked to be deliberately disingenuous. Like when he said that the New Testament was handed down like a child's game of telephone, and that the reason we see the miracles in the Bible, the reason we see the God claims in the Bible, the reason we see these things is because it was oral things that got handed down like a child's game of telephone, and legend came into it. And I knew that. Here's the part about this. I knew that not to be true. Like, that is not how Jewish scripture was handed down. That is not what they did. They have people called scribes, and they wrote things down. In fact, this is when I started going, it sounds disingenuous. I don't know if it's deliberate. I don't know the person offhand. But I do know this. He's written a lot of books, and he's somebody that people go to a lot to re-up these ideas that Jesus isn't who he said he was. It's not Jesus' fault. It's just that they made the stuff up. So that being disingenuous and my scientific brain clicking on this, then I started to really study what do the scientists say about this text? And I shared a little bit of this already in this class. Here's what they say about this text. First of all, one, that the Gospels especially are biography. That's the genre. So the Gospel writers themselves were writing them as a biography. Secondly, this is the one that got me. Like, it literally just said, this changes everything. We have manuscript after manuscript after manuscript after manuscript after manuscript after manuscript after manuscript of this text, especially of the New Testament. We have 5,000 Greek manuscripts, 19,000 manuscripts in other languages. They're distributed all over the world. And you know what? Not one of them has a Gospel of Mark that's in Egypt that differs from the Gospel of Mark that's found in Europe, other than what you would expect. And guess what that is? Scribal and copy errors. Because this isn't some child's game of telephone. These things were carefully copied and handed down. In fact, we actually have, some really early ones too that they're still out of Mark and Matthew that they can date They think they've dated down to AD 60s. But we know, and it's widely accepted, that we have small manuscript pieces, fragments of the Gospel of John. They have definitely dated to AD 120. Everyone thinks that John was written somewhere in the 90s AD, towards the end of John's life. That means that we have this papyrus is a copy maybe of the original. 30 years from when the original, so in other words, the idea that this is some magnificent game of telephone is just stupid. And the science behind this was what it told me, that this was a reliable text. But, of course, all of that does not get me Jesus. Like, being certain that this is reliable, being certain that he resurrected. We get to talk about that in our church services over the next few weeks. Being certain of all of those things doesn't get you Jesus. One of the last pieces of this puzzle for me ended up being a person that we lived in Richmond, Virginia for a time, and there was a visiting professor at VCU at the time, and his name is Arno Penzias, Penzias. And the reason he's a significant person in my life is because he's not really an apologist. He's not a theologian, all right? But he is a magnificent physicist. He was still alive, so I can't say was. In fact, he is, alongside with his colleagues, is the person that found the microwave cosmic background radiation. Not that not that you care, but this is a big deal, okay? It's such a big deal, the guy won a Nobel Prize for it. But this man who made these huge things that actually, and the reason that was kind of fundamental for me is because here's a guy who's just a scientist. He's just a teacher. He's a lovely guy. I mean, he some of his sayings actually remind me of some Regisms. He doesn't have a lot of quotes, like you can't go quote him or anything. He was just one of these guys that loved teaching. He loved his students. He said, I would learn more from my students than I ever learned from a textbook, that I ever learned from looking through a telescope. I learned more from my students. But here's one of the things he said that would be a good Regism. If you do not want to be replaced by a computer, don't act like one. I think it's awesome. Be creative, be different, be alive, be everything except predictable and programmable. Do not conform. I love the guy. He's just a really good guy. And anyway, he did say a couple things that I thought were really cool. One of his speeches about the cosmic background radiation. Why this is an important deal is because it actually points us back in time to when the universe actually began. And it's a picture that tells us that the universe had a beginning and that this beginning came off just perfectly so that we would be having this discussion tonight. And for him, for Arno, it was, he said, it was either an absurdly improbable accident, or, and this is where he came down on, or something being knew that we would be here. And for folks trying to maybe wrap their brains around that, it's like a fruit tree gives us the idea that someone's going to eat fruit. He said, if we can infer purpose from purpose, we begin to understand kind of the knowledge of who created it. From that, we can actually understand the intention for why it was created. And from this intention, he says, I myself can receive kind of an impression of the Almighty. This idea of purpose, and the reason that I hopefully will be able to close this up, um, this idea of purpose for me was magnificent. It like, uh, because that always got me. In my scientific studies, that always got me. In other words, I understood that these lines of amino acids would fold themselves in such a way that they could then act as an enzyme in our body. But what didn't make any sense to me was that how did it know what to do? Like, how do these enzymes, how do these amino acids that are just chemicals, they're just atoms, know that it had this activity to take place? And this scientist, at a perfect time in my life, gave this idea of what purpose is. That purpose, that things have the cause and effect, the purpose of things, even as simple as an enzyme, actually speak to help us see the intentions of our God. In other words, he had intentions for fruit to be eaten. He had intentions for the microwave background radiation to be just such that we would be here. He had intentions for that protein to be able to fold and carry on the mechanisms. And you go back and you understand that this is a life sustaining intention. Well, if you think back at some of the testimony I gave you, you had a person, because he was relying on other people's faith, didn't realize that he had a purpose. And so, this idea that if a fruit can have a purpose, well, by golly, I think I can have a purpose. And so, it ending up all of this tangled mess. And there would be a lot more that I could stick into this type of apologia. But what had ended up happening is this: I knew it couldn't be my mother's or my father's, my wife's, or anybody else's faith. They put great examples in front of me, and they've loved me in great ways. But I had to understand that God created me in his image and his likeness. He gives me a purpose and a worth far more than I can ever imagine. And that I have to cling to that and trust in that and not try to gain my own achieving purpose and whatnot. So here's what I would like, and I think you guys would be able to do with something like this. So hopefully you saw that I told a good little personal story. Hopefully you saw I put little tidbits about textual criticism in here. Hopefully you saw I threw in some good scientists' names and some other ones that I think said some foolish things. These are things that people like you could go look up. In the meantime, I was also weaving a story of real transformation in my own life from a starting place where I felt worthless or purposeless to an ending result that God has given my life reality and purpose. Not that I kind of found that, but I realized that if an enzyme can have purpose, then that means I do as well. And so how these conversations go down have a lot more to do with your audience than they do with you. But what you have, though, at the ready is some things you can kind of practice and mold in there. For instance, if the person I was talking to had maybe some issues with drugs and alcohol, I would focus on maybe that portion of my life and how God gave me victory in those areas. If somebody's struggling with kind of addictions to type of sensuality or stuff like that, I could, believe it or not, we could easily talk into those instances. Now, if they get into something where it's kind of outside of your personal context, then you can still give an apologia for the reason for your hope, but it's also hopeful that we have other people's stories. You know, there are stories I can't tell. They're just not. You know, some people might just struggle, like literally struggle. They don't have times of like great rebellion against parents in the world. They struggle with other aspects. Well, that's not my story. My story was one of pretty much me getting in my own way on multiple times and having life be kind of a, struggle, heartache, loss, dealing with things like that. That's not my story. I do hope that's my children's story, though. I mean, my prayer is that they have a completely different apologia. And so maybe they can, if I look, I don't know how to talk to you, but you need to go talk to my daughter because she was brought up as a PK. And she knows how tough it is. Pastor's kid. You better watch out. She knows how tough it is to grow and have your own faith and have your own expression, your own relationship with God when everything around you is built around church. I can't have that story. She does. And so that's why it's hopefully important for us to know each other's story and to be able to have things at the ready. So I'll practice some of this. I'll get some of these things where they're at the ready and be ready to adjust and maneuver this. Because I do believe we should be able to say something that really gets somebody going, huh, interesting. All right. So it's not just blind faith kind of thing. And so, anyway, that's that. Where are we at time-wise? Look at this, 7:53. I'm nailing it. Questions? Oh, Ebony, is there any questions I'm supposed to ask you? I will. I'll count to 10. Anything in here at all? And you can ask questions about my story. 7. What is 7? Oh, I'll take that. Now, there would be a time in my life where 7 out of 10 would not be acceptable. That is not now. That's right. I'd go, okay, time out. We're going again. All right. You came in right at the beginning of the apologia. That was to a degree. Put it this way. Here's what I kind of lean towards giving at this time was one, a sense of where I was underneath the achiever. And how God's his actual fashioning of me to like actually seek answers was actually a grace, a huge grace for me. For some people, that seeking answers, ends up being like a curse for them. They keep butting into things and not able to say, you know what, God, you're the answer to this. So, the guy, the Nobel Prize winner that I'm kind of referring to, here's the dirty little scientific secret that you don't get to hear in the world is that because of their team's findings of the microwave radiation background, that ended up going, and this is why they have the LHC, these particle accelerators. They're doing the science at these high heats of what happens to physics and whatnot. So it's funny how we now know with his finding and those findings, like what everything's got that's kind of going on all the way back to the beginning to about 10 to the negative, depending on what papers you read, negative 43, 36, or 13 seconds. Okay? So we have a decent understanding in science of what actually was taking place in the universe at that time. Here's what they don't tell you. Guess what they know about T0, time zero? Huh? They don't know anything. And any scientist says they understand or know what happened at t equals 0 is flat out lying to you. They have no idea what happens before that because all the laws of our current physics that we think of, that's Newtonian physics and theory of relativity and relative physics, and you name it, quantum mechanics, all of it breaks. Well, just put it this way, all of it breaks down. Like we would actually have to go behind 10 to the negative 43 seconds. We actually have to have new science that we don't have at all. So if any scientist comes to you, and this guy, T0 would be the event. In other words, here's what a scientist cannot tell you, that T0 is not God saying, let there be light. There's no way. In fact, that actually, according to this scientist that actually found the kind of the doorway to all of this science that led to the Big Bang Theory, that's how he says it's probably the best explanation, is that we have a creator who actually has given a universe a purpose and is showing, I love how he said it, is showing the impression of himself through how things actually take place, the intention of what a fruit tastes like, the intention of a conversation, the intention and purpose of things. I think it's a kind of a cool thing that creation is actually an explanation of the purpose and intention of God. And that is to bring forth life. So. No doubt, I agree. That's right. So that means that God, that communal Godhead of Father, Son, Holy Spirit, the thing that we call supernatural because it's outside of nature, that existing thing, that love relationship is now being expressed out through this. And so, it is cool. It is a cool way to look at life, that's for sure. No doubt about it. All right, I got off. Anything else? Did Ebony write a question? Not tonight. Aw. Lily. Not tonight. No, she's there. She just had something there. She put some kind of symbol. I can't. It's an Egyptian. I don't know what that is. A mummy? I don't know. Anyway, awesome. Closing off, ending broadcast. Oh, actually, one question. Oh, gosh. How long should an apologia be? I don't know. Mine probably went too long. Again, you have to remember the reason. That's a great question, Ebony. The reason I laid this down is because, no, it's all right. I'll get right on it. The reason I laid this one out this way is because I wanted the very real kind of underlying personal transformation. In other words, that underlying achiever kind of person that everyone, when you see the good grades and you see, sports success and you see some of that stuff and you're like, oh, everything's fine. No, everything wasn't fine at all. There was a really hurt person under there. And that hurt person, there's a great saying, hurt people hurt people. And so I hurt a lot of people because I was a hurt person. Yeah, but I wanted to make sure that story got told. But in that process, I'm also able to give off things like the manuscript history of this, like refuting the disingenuous theology and really poor excuse for the Bible from someone else, like the scientists who I named. So, in other words, these are people that they would then, if they wanted to, say, hey, what was that scientist's name again? Or you read some of their books? Which book would you suggest for me? And I would, here. But don't forget this book. Yeah. Read the. So, in other words, I wanted to weave that both in there. And so build that thing, and you'll be able to, when it comes to length, I would be more important with what parts of the story are critical. And so for me, there was a real personal transformation that took place when I finally trusted God myself and not just the faith I was brought up in, the reliability of the scriptures. And then I added in me with my intellect kind of reasoning brain that ended up being a key in being able to understand that people a lot smarter than me have come to the conclusion that the Bible is a very reliable text and that Christ is who he said he is. And they were able to put their faith in him. And I was able to finally put mine as well. So lengthwise, I don't think it's, more importantly, it would be, like you said, 20 minutes max. More importantly is what aspects are vital. And you'll know, because usually these conversations, remember, somebody is approaching you and asking you for the reason for your hope. Leaf is giving more Apple end products. End product of an apple means God loves us. I love it. An apple, yeah. She's like, if you never think of all the atoms and elements and everything that takes in taste itself. Heck, taste. Like, you don't have to have taste. Biologically, you can just take in food. Things don't have to taste. So taste, it's all a beautiful grace of God. Yes. All right. So now I am going to close this off. Awesome. Good job, online folks. You guys are loved, and we'll see you. Oh, gosh. I know. I'm trying to get back over. I didn't break it, I don't think. All right. Peace.